The title race is down to 8 points with 2 rounds to go as Lewis Hamilton takes consecutive victories for only the second time this season. My name's Aaron and this is the 5 Red Lights. Let's dive on in to the Qatar race analysis.
1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go!
So welcome back everybody. Before I dive on into my Qatar Grand Prix race analysis, if you like what you see here and enjoy the content, please take some time to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and also follow me on Twitter at 5_red_lights. It would help the channel out immensely, and I love to hear what you have to say about each and every Grand Prix and all the other little bits and pieces that I have to offer. I did do some fun analysis of the incident in Brazil between Max and Lewis last week, so go and check that out and see what you make of my attempts to be better than Paul di Resta at not favouring one driver. So let's dive on into the Qatar race analysis, and it was a straightforward and dominant victory for Lewis Hamilton. As I said in the intro, only the second time this season that he's taken consecutive victories, and that happened way back. I mean, so far back this year, so much has happened in this crazy and chaotic and incredible Formula One season. It happened way back at the Portuguese and Spanish Grand Prix. Was actually round 3 and 4 of the championship, and he's not taken consecutive victories again until rounds 19 and 20, which for a man like Lewis Hamilton, who has won so many races throughout his career and in recent years just reeled off win after win after win after win, that is absolutely incredible. And that just shows the level that Max Verstappen and Red Bull have been operating at this season, and also some of the carnage that we've seen as well, because Lewis won obviously in Britain at Silverstone and looks set to repeat the trick in Hungary, but obviously that was a crazy race and he ended up on the grid on his own and came through for second place in the end after Vettel was disqualified. But really, without the Bottas bowling ball carnage, we probably would have just had another Lewis victory that day. Now, Lewis drove superbly the whole weekend, and as he normally does at a new circuit, he takes his time in speeding up. Sometimes I think he doesn't give everything. He tries to work things out a little bit more, whereas drivers like Max and Valtteri perhaps in practice go a little bit more towards 100% in terms of maybe trying to feel their way of what the maximum is around a new circuit, whereas Lewis likes to build up to that. And that was the case again. How often do we see he's a little bit behind in practice, especially practice 3 Bottas or Verstappen is quicker, and then Lewis in qualifying pulls it out of the bag, and it was 4.5 tenths this weekend, which is actually the biggest dry pole position margin of the season, which again just speaks to how close this championship battle is being fought. Not just on the track, it's getting a bit frosty or spicy depending on which way you lean, off the track as well. Christian Horner saying what he thinks and getting himself into trouble, which for me personally was quite funny, because I think sometimes Christian Horner needs to just rein it in a little bit. I know all of the team bosses will say a few things they perhaps shouldn't from time to time, and that's fine, but going in and calling marshals rogue and blaming them for your driver not backing off is a bit past the point. And Christian Horner, he's much more well paid than I am, so he's probably got a good enough lawyer to get himself out of problems. But what problem he couldn't solve was that Lewis Hamilton had the pace all weekend to cover Max Verstappen, and in the end, on race day, it was just simply shadow what Max did. If Max wanted to go for the undercut, just cover it off the lap later. By the point that Max had got through after his grid penalty, Lewis was already 4 seconds up the road and comfortably into his rhythm. Max, they say he had damage to his wing, but the fact that he went on to set the fastest lap with a 124 flat suggests that damage wasn't really holding him up. He could still put in a serious lap time if he needed to. And everything at the end suggested that Lewis had everything he needed to take a straightforward victory, which he did. And a valuable one it was too, because it closes the gap by another 6 points, despite Max's best efforts with the fastest lap. You could argue that the real threat, the biggest threat to Lewis's victory hopes were from Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso at the start, considering they were on the soft tyres after and alongside and behind Lewis after Max's demotion back to P7. Speaking on Max's penalty, he's got history, he's banged to rights on it. There's no way out of it. If there's yellow flags and you go past them and you don't lift, you're going to get found out. The amount of telemetry and data these cars have logging within them and being transmitted back to the garages or being able to be sourced out of the car at later points, it's just astronomical. So there's no way of hiding it. You're just not going to get away with it. So that's all I have to say about that little incident. But Pierre and Fernando actually had a shot of taking the lead. Although, in the end, the start difference wasn't that great, medium to soft. And Max himself proved that from P7, where he jumped up to P4 on the opening lap, ahead of a couple of soft tyre runners in, I think, Lando and I think Carlos Sainz was on the medium as well. But he made a pretty good start, and as did Lewis. Mark of a champion, get the thing off the line well when you need to. He's not actually always had it his own way from the start. As we saw in 2016, he made a series of shocking starts which actually helped cost him that world championship. But once he got out of turn 1 in the lead, no one was going to catch him. Let's be honest. So he had it all under control and he was just managing everything. He probably could have done a one stop, but why leave yourself vulnerable to Verstappen when he's on a two stop and you've got the pace to cover him by doing the same thing. So, it's a fantastic win. As Toto Wolff has said, the lion has been awoken within Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis was therefore absolutely untouchable in Qatar. That's 30 tracks, 30 different tracks that he's won at out of 35 that he's raced on. That's a staggering 86% of circuits raced on that he's taken a victory at. I mean, how many more crazy statistics or records does this guy need to break before people give him, the amount of credit that he fully deserves? I mean, one day he will be fully appreciated. 8th World Championship, the chances for that, you could very much make a case for him being the favourite now, going into Jeddah and to Abu Dhabi with his what Toto Wolff described as the spicy engine. So, all to play for. 8 points in it. Which way is it going? Lewis has momentum, but Max has the championship lead. But it's going to be oh so close. It's going to be dramatic to the very last. It might even come down to a fastest lap point. Let's move away from the two guys who filled the first two positions and move to Fernando Alonso returning to the podium after 3/4 of a decade. Podium number 98 comes in Qatar. Driving at his very best again is Fernando, and it's a huge result for Alpine, who move into 5th place in the Constructors' Championship ahead of AlphaTauri. That pretty much sews that position up for them, which would be a repeat of 2020 when they were actually a Renault. Esteban Ocon backed him up with a P5, so that's really good for Alpine. What else was really helpful about this race was very good about this race was that the overtaking wasn't as difficult as people feared it was going to be. DRS was powerful, and it was very similar to Mugello. It was a very high speed track, and that sweeping turn 1, if you had a good run with DRS, you could just send it right around the outside or down the inside, and you'd be in control of potentially making a move. The difference with Mugello was that the left-hander for the second corner was a tighter left-hander, so you had a bit more of a braking zone where they could go side by side into that. Whereas at Qatar, it was a little bit of a break, but it was more of a sweeping left into a sweeping right. So very different in terms of their exit profiles. DRS zone to be shorter. I mean, if we come back, and obviously next year they won't go to Qatar. They'll be back in 2023. So it'd be interesting to see how the 22 cars are then affected by DRS and whether they think the DRS could be shortened and then make it more of a duel on the brakes. But we'll see. I think if they went back there with these cars this weekend, if they trimmed the DRS zone by 50 metres, maybe 100 metres, that might help. Who knows? And another big talking point from the race were the punctures to the front left tyre. Now, we've seen them before at Silverstone, which is a track that punishes that front left quite heavily. Potentially arguably most famously, Lewis Hamilton's final lap puncture last year for the British Grand Prix, where he finished the race on 3 wheels, still winning the race. Were Pirelli to blame for these punctures? Now, they brought the hardest in their range that it's possible to bring, and the tyres were then subjected to pretty much constant loading for 30, 35, 40 laps. And the front left, as I already said, was a massive risk anyway, so you had to care for it, you had to really look after it. And Fernando Alonso spoke about how he was looking after the tyres for 20 laps to begin the stint. Now, yes, these drivers are paid to drive these cars fast, but they're also paid to drive them safely. So if you have to look after your front left tyre, do it. So those who ran too long or those who punished that left front paid for it. Whether you're in a potentially championship winning Mercedes, or if you're in a Williams that is back of the grid, the tyre did not like being punished too much, and it gave you no warning in terms of failure. Now, I think that is the crucial thing that the drivers will be upset by, is that there was no warning of failure, but it wasn't necessarily a massive explosion like we've seen before. Think back to Sebastian Vettel's puncture in Spa 2015, where he comes over Radion and the thing just lets go and there's tyre bits going everywhere. It was a slower deflation. Okay, not ideal, never ideal to have a puncture, because you could lose control of the car. But it was still the hardest tyre available, and I think the teams were slow on the uptake that a two-stopper was actually potentially better, because overtaking was possible, and that, I think, is what stopped them going for the two-stop. Now, of course, Sergio Perez went for a two-stop and didn't reclaim his third place on the road, although the VSC may have got in the way at the end. So it's a tricky one, but it would have been really interesting to see how the midfield had fared, some going for one stop, some going for two stops that were done a little bit earlier, not forced late on, like Lando Norris. He lost out big time because they were going for a one stop and then they got caught out. So if they committed to that two stop earlier, they may have still finished ahead of the two Ferraris. As it was, Lando finished behind them, having ran fourth much of the race. So that is a little bit of a rundown on my thoughts of the race generally. Let's dive on into my driver ratings next, and just have a little bit to say on everybody. Okay, let's kick things off with the race winner, Lewis Hamilton. Started from pole position, won the race. A dominant win from qualifying onwards. No one had an answer to his pace in the race to boot. He did miss out on the fastest lap with the virtual safety car, but Lewis was still fancy himself winning the final two races, and with it, World Championship number 8. So his rating for the Qatar Grand Prix weekend is 4.5. In second position was Max Verstappen, recovering from a 7th place start, having been demoted 5 places for his double waved yellow flag infringement. So he grabbed that fastest lap point, as I've mentioned, and it was best possible damage limitation, with Lewis winning and Max finishing second. A good start, set him up well, and he would likely have finished second anyway. Even if they were on the front row, I don't think Max would have had enough in hand to get past Lewis on the day. Would have been interesting to see them go wheel to wheel around this sort of circuit for 57 laps, but in the end, Lewis had him covered. So for Max, it is a rating of a 3. His race was much better than his qualifying. I'm docking some rating points for his misdemeanor in Q3, which actually cost him 5 places on the grid. In third place was Fernando Alonso, who started third, benefiting from the demotions of Verstappen and Bottas. And there's life in the old dog yet. I mean, he's 40 years old and he's still driving like he's 25. Alpine got their strategy spot on, proving that a one-stop was possible if you were very kind to the tyres to begin with. And you got Fernando Alonso, who just... his lateral thinking is ridiculous. He picked his battles wisely. He didn't need to defend against Verstappen. He was never going to be able to defend against him in the way he stopped Lewis getting past in Hungary. And also, he absolutely mugged Gasly at turn 2 on the opening lap. You know, that set him up for the race. If he'd got boxed in behind Gasly, who knows what might have happened. He might have had to push those tyres, then pit early and then go on the 2-stop, which would have been fun, seeing Fernando come through. But I think everyone was very happy to see Nando back on the podium. So for Fernando, his rating is a 4. In fourth place was Sergio Perez. A strong performance from Checo, but he did underperform in qualifying. So he only qualified 11th. His strategy arguably cost him a podium. So it was a little bit unfortunate with the VSC late on. But he might have lost more if he'd had a tyre failure like the others had he run the one-stop strategy. So for Checo, it is a 3.5. In fifth place was Esteban Ocon. Another strong showing from Esteban. Secured excellent backup points for Alpine to Alonso's podium, who, as I've said, are now 25 ahead of AlphaTauri. And he did everything he could against Perez. He wasn't really going to defend against him down the straight. It's a big sweeping right-hander. But what he did do was hound him through the next few corners to just make him defend and not let him have the optimal line and make him look in his mirrors and, you know, just drive a little bit defensively. That slows someone down a little bit. He claimed it was 3 seconds. I don't think it was quite that much, but it definitely just stopped Perez zoning in on what was ahead of him that little bit longer. Anyway, so for Esteban, I give him a 3.5. Behind Esteban was his good mate Lance Stroll. Good points actually for the Canadian and for Aston Martin. They're not really going to challenge AlphaTauri for 6th place in the Constructors. But for Lance, it was a good performance. Catapulted himself up the order early on from 12th on the grid. Delivered a tidy race, and that's all you can ask for when, you know, you've got a car that's pretty much midfield, lower half of midfield. On the days when it can score points, score as many points as possible, and do the best you can when it can't. So he made a couple of nice overtakes. He was being attacked by Bottas, and instead he turned defence into attack by trying to overtake Yuki Sonoda and completed it. So nice stuff from Lance. He gets a 3.5 as well. In 7th and 8th places were the 2 Ferraris. Carlos Sainz finishing ahead of Charles Leclerc. Now, Carlos kind of lacked a bit of race pace. He got swallowed on the straights by the faster cars. And Charles Leclerc recovered from 13th on the grid with a new chassis, having broken the one he used in qualifying in Q1. Which kind of gave him a handling issue in Q2. And they both managed a one-stop. So it was possible, and Ferrari knew that it was going to be front limited, so they probably drove accordingly. And that's handy points, you know. I think they're, barring a disaster for them, and McLaren maybe winning one of the last 2 races, Ferrari are far and away sewn up for 3rd in the championship. For the Constructors. So for Carlos, his rating is a 3 because his qualifying was very good with a 5th place start, which I think was actually a 7th place qualifying. But that wasn't quite so bad. As Charles, who started 13th, so he gets a 2.5. Behind the Ferraris was Lando Norris in 9th place. Late puncture cost him P5 or potentially even P4. Depending on how much time it took Sergio Perez to catch and to pass him. That's 2 10th places and a 9th in the last 3 races, though, for Lando, which isn't great. So he gets a rating of 3. And rounding out the top 10 was Sebastian Vettel. Now, Seb did finish where he started, But I bet it was an adventure getting back there, because he did drop to 17th after being forced wide by Bottas at the first corner. So really, that's a point well earned for Seb. And I rate his performance as a 3. Let's drop into the guys outside the top 10, starting with Pierre Gasly, who actually started on the front row, and he finished the race in 11th. The two-stopper didn't work for AlphaTauri. They just chewed up their tyres, especially the softs. They were the first ones to pit. Bit of a nightmare for them, to be honest. For Pierre, it's a rating of 2, considering he was on the front row, and it could have been something brilliant, but alas, it wasn't. In 12th was Daniel Ricciardo. Another difficult day for Daniel. Not all his fault, because I'm sure he could have made some progress, but he had to fuel save due to a glitch in the software, telling them that he didn't have enough fuel. And then they found out that he did, and he had too much fuel. So not only was he pushing as hard as he could to make up that lost time, but he was actually too heavy. So his performance would have been suffering accordingly. So, tough day for Ricardo. 3 non-scores in a row, though, for Danny. And there you have that coupled with Lando scoring only a few points, a handful of points over the last few races. That's the crux of the matter for McLaren. That's where the fight for third probably has been lost. In 13th was Yuki Sonoda. Very similar story to his teammate Pierre Gasly, having started 8th. He dropped like a stone after his early stop. Just generally lacked pace because they were chewing through the tyres. Behind Yuki in 14th was the outgoing Kimi Raikkonen, rising from 16th to 14th. 2 stops, had a bit of a fright when Latifi turned in on him a little bit, but not much else to say. He was just sort of there doing nothing really. There was no memeable radio. There was no drink problems. There was no whatever for Kimi. His hobby is just coming to an end, unfortunately. So I rate Kimi's performance as a 2. As I rate... Hang on, I've just forgotten to rate Pierre, Daniel and Yuki's drives. But they're all a 2 as well. Also getting a 2 is Antonio Giovanazzi, pretty anonymous throughout. Didn't really see anything from him. 2 stopped, but it was kind of the performance of a man with nothing left to fight for now that he knows his future lies elsewhere. I believe he's going to Formula E. So we'll see how he copes there. He wouldn't be the first ex-Formula 1 driver to go there and be competitive. In 16th was Mick Schumacher. He gets a rating of a 2. A lot of the people in the outside the points are getting 2s because they just weren't really seen all too much, and they had pretty mundane race evenings even. So Mick Schumacher, it just must have been tough to drive around that track with his car because it's a bit of a dog, the Haas, and this was a track where your car needed to function well, and the Haas doesn't. 17th was George Russell. He was one of the puncture victims. He was only destined for a lower midfield finish anyway, so a rating of 2 for him. But he did get back into Q2 and qualify 15th, having been out-qualified by Latifi in Brazil. Last of the finishers was Nikita Mazepin. Tough weekend for him. Completed very few laps in practice. I think it was him who got in the way of Alonso in the mid-race. But with his car, that was kind of inevitable because he'd had so few laps, and as I've already said about with Mick, it's a bit of a dog to drive. I'm impressed that Alonso didn't just smash into the back of him. Those who failed to finish were Latifi, who beached it after a puncture, and Bottas, who, he had a poor start, and then he had the puncture, but I think that fight back through the field would have induced the puncture a little bit because he'd have been putting more stress through the tyre and obviously the dirty air. He'd have had to work a little bit harder to stay close to them. But then, to be fair, Perez did 2 stop, so that's how they counteracted that at Red Bull. But a DNF for Valtteri Bottas, and he'll be a man looking to bounce back in Jeddah. And Bottas gets a 3. because he fought back pretty well, actually, more well than expected. So that is your race ratings for the Qatar Grand Prix. And now we will return with 5 things about the Qatar Grand Prix. I didn't get a chance to do them last week with the Brazilian Grand Prix because I was very busy before making my notes for that race recap. So I didn't do that. I did the T4 analysis instead. But this weekend it is back, or this week it is back for the Qatar edition. So let's start with the things that were bad. The FIA allowing potentially dangerous driving to continue with their... they didn't reinvestigate the Verstappen-Hamilton incident, and they didn't clear it up in the driver briefing either. So, it's a bit dangerous giving the drivers lack of clarity in how they need to conduct themselves on the track in terms of what is and is not allowed. Obviously, they know how to drive the car and how not to have contact, but how far are you allowed to go before you're going to get told off? Second is the puncture that cost Bottas a shot of a podium when he was driving really well. It was one of the best comeback fighting drives that we've seen from Bottas in his Mercedes career. Quite often he gets stuck, but he managed to move himself through the pack, to be honest, pretty well. So it was a shame to see that drive and all that effort go to waste. Third was Christian Horner making himself look stupid with his string of dumb interviews and his comments. There is a way to conduct yourself, and that is not it. That will be lesson 101 for any budding team principal in the future. Don't do this, is what it will say. Number 4 was Pierre Gasly's tumble down the order after potentially being on the podium. And number 5 was perhaps arguably the too much power that DRS had on the main straight. It helped move cars forward, but defending cars had no chance quite often. So there's a balance to be struck, and it's always going to be tricky when you go to a venue for the first time. You can either make it too powerful or not powerful enough. So you'd rather have it slightly too powerful, to be honest. If I'm thinking in terms of the racing, you'd rather have cars be able to move forward, encourage attacking driving. Let's move on to the things that were great about the Qatar Grand Prix, and let's first of all start with the track. And it is fast. It is super fast. As I said, it was like Mugello. I don't think they were going below 4th gear. I think they dropped into 3rd gear once or twice, maybe when they entered the pit lane. But super fast track. Fernando Alonso said he could drive it all night. So, glowing review from a 2-time world champion. Next was finally actually a little bit of consistency from the stewards with their penalties. Max and Valtteri were banged to rights on missing yellow flags and not lifting, and they got penalties for it. So, I want to say well done, but the stewards just kind of seem to make it up as they go along. So, can't really congratulate them too much for it. 3 is Fernando Alonso's return to the podium. Welcome back, Nando. He's missed out on a couple of opportunities to be on the podium this season, so it was good to see him finally bag one himself. Number 4 was Sergio Perez's fight back through the field from 11th on the grid. He did really well, actually. He arguably should have been on the podium, so a cracking effort from Checo. And number 5 was Lewis Hamilton championing LGBTQ plus equality with his helmet design, which you've seen flashing through the images on the screen. There is no bounds to this man's humanity. It's just brilliant. I believe he's going to wear it for the final 2 races as well. So, imagine the scene when if he picks up that 8th World Championship, having won the last 2 races, and he holds that beautiful helmet aloft. 8-time World Champion, record breaker, borderline, arguably the most ultimate humanitarian of recent times, especially in the sporting world. So, just fantastic on Lewis's part. Not only is he a great racer, he is a great human being. So there you have it. That is my race recap done. Let me know your thoughts. Did you enjoy the Qatar Grand Prix? Do you think F1 should go back to the Losail International Circuit, or as has been mentioned, they may find a new venue, maybe downtown, in the future from 2023? They've got some time to think about it and prepare for it. they can give them a few more months than they've given Jeddah to get ready, perhaps. So we'll wait and see. And let me know how happy you were with an emoji about Fernando Alonso's return to the podium. That's all for today. I will see you next time when the 5 red lights go out. My name's Aaron, and this has been the 5 red lights. Until the lights go out, it's bye for now.